Are you playing to win or just running out the clock? In sports, the game clock drives every decision. It creates urgency, sharpens focus, and pushes players to perform their best. So what if you treated your life with that same sense of urgency? I've created an exercise to help you do just that. It's called Your Game Clock. Download Your Game Clock today at bill-burke.net/clock. It's free, it's simple, yet transformative, and it could be the first step towards achieving peak performance in the areas of your life that matter the most. Remember, life isn't a practice run. Every second counts, and your time is now. Welcome to another edition of the Fortitude Forum, and I am so fired up to have my next guest today. He's a keynote speaker, he's a performance coach, and he's also a former professional baseball player. I'm so fascinated by that sport, all sports, of course, but it is a tough road to be able to say and call yourself a former professional baseball player. Charlie Ruiz, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
What's going on, Bill? I'm honored to be here and excited for the conversation.
Yeah, me too. It's great to have met you recently and to learn a little bit about your story, but I want to have you pass along that story to the audience because I think you bring such a unique perspective to so much of this personal development stuff that we love to operate in and to learn from and to grow from. Thank you for being here, but I wanted to first ask you because I mentioned baseball and of course we've got that in common. We've got the athletic background as a lot of our guests do here on the show. But talk to me a little bit about your childhood, your fascination with that game, falling in love with that game, because that, as I mentioned, is not an easy road. So why baseball? What got you attracted to it to the point where you had to say, I need to do that. I need to see if I have what it takes to play that game.
Man, Bill, what a question to start. I do think of baseball as like nostalgia just in general. So I think of like the stories, me sitting on like the porch with my godfather or sitting in the living room with my mom and dad and like hearing these stories about Willie Mays and then like being a young kid and then watching the King Griffey Juniors of the world and the Barry Bonds growing
Yeah.
up, like being here in San Francisco Bay Area. It was such a baseball driven like city and like area to where there's history there. So I just loved the relational side of hearing the stories and like tying that back to hearing my uncle and my dad talk about when they were at Candlestick or when they went to go see Willie Mays back in the day. Like those are the starts of me understanding, oh, this game of baseball, right, is bigger than just the game, right? There's history here. And I think I started surrounding myself with the stories from them, which made me love it.
I love that you bring that up because today our world, even in sports, is so fast paced and it's win now. A lot of the culture can be at times, depending on the sport and the players and the teams, of course, look at me now and it's more individual driven. So I love that you went back to the history and appreciated that because I'm the same way with football. A few years ago, I took my son to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and man, I could have spent days there just going through all the exhibits and learning about and remembering those stories and those players from my past. So I love that you brought up the history of it. But talk to me now about actually playing the game and what lessons you took away from that. Of course, there's always the common lessons that everybody knows that can be pulled from sports, but from a mental perspective, take me inside what you needed to do in order to separate yourself, not physically, but mentally from the rest of the guys.
Yes, like from a physical, Bill, I can't help but not give this story based on the history. And then I want to answer this question. So if I
Sure.
may, can I share something that just happened in maybe
Absolutely.
the last 6 months that just really speaks to what you shared about you going back to the Hall of Fame and this, or are you going back and experience the museum? And then, yes, I want to dive into the lessons learned. But I was fortunate just this past year. MLB hosted their first game at Rockwood Field in Birmingham, Alabama. They had transformed one of the original fields, and it's actually where Willie Mays started his career. So I got an invite indirectly through somebody who was hosting one of the events there. And it made no sense for me to be there. I had a small gig in, I don't even know where in Alabama, that I was like, you know what? I'm going to be in Alabama. And there's no reason in the world that I am there. Like it's an hour and a half away. I stick around for another day and I'll go to the celebration of the Negro Leagues at Rockwood Field in Birmingham, Alabama. I walk in there and it was the only time I had ever really been in that type of baseball museum. I haven't done Cooperstown yet. But I walked in and I heard all of the stories that I was just telling you, that I sat there and listened to my godfather. I listened to my dad talk about the Negro Leagues and Willie Mays and Hank Aaron and all of the history of what that now transcends into today's game. And I was by myself, which is also awkward because I'm home and I have 3 daughters. So it's rare that I'm gone away from home. And I remember questioning myself of like, why am I here for these 2 days? I'm by myself. I don't even know how to watch a game by myself. But I was there for the history. I was there for that moment. And then the day of the minor league stadium or the minor league game where all the minor league players played at that stadium, I was sitting there talking to this guy from Major League Baseball. And he looks over at me and he's, I can't believe that Willie's not going to be here. And he was talking about Willie Mays. And then he says, and the fact that he just passed away is just crazy. And I looked at him and I'm like, excuse me? What did you just say? He said, we just got word that Willie Mays just passed away. And I looked at him and he looked at me and I started crying, Bill. He was like, oh, were you? I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, I just got flooded with my late godfather. Like, Willie Mays is what brought me to this game. That's why I'm here, Rickwood, to celebrate the first. Like, this is where it was Willie Mays Plaza. It was all there at that field. He was supposed to be honored there, and he passed away while I was there. I looked over. I saw the highlights. I called my dad. We talked and cried again. Called my little brother, and then the 7th inning stretch hit, and then they played the "Say Hey Willie" song, and the whole stadium just erupted in it. And it was one of the most powerful moments to honor him, and the fact that I was just sitting there by myself at the Mecca where it all started just is something I'll never forget, especially when it comes to the world of like baseball and the nostalgia that it brought. And that was last year.
Wow, that is an incredible story, and it's amazing what these players and those moments in time really mean to us as young, impressionable kids who are falling in love with the game. And gave a speech about a week ago, and I talked about why we love sports, and I think you just hit on a lot of it. It's really not about what we are accomplishing on the field, although there's elements of that as well. It's more about
Yes.
the connection to the past and the connection to our teammates and the building of communities and all these things that are much bigger than ourselves. And I love that you appreciate that because I think it's so important to carry that on for us as athletes and former athletes and pass that on to the next generation as well. So I love that you said that. And I love that you got to experience that because that is a once in a lifetime moment right there.
No, it was. And thank you for letting me go there. I could not tell you that story when we were talking about
Yeah,
history and nostalgia and the relationship that I have with baseball, because that all was answered in Birmingham, Alabama.
that's amazing. That is truly amazing. But I also wanted to ask you as well about your experience as a player and really go inside where you were mentally because I know you were a pitcher, but a pitcher, maybe more so than any other position on any other sports team, is you're out there by yourself and everybody's eyes are on you. So physically, of course, we all have our challenges and our struggles, and that is what it is to a certain degree. But mentally, was there a way that you chose to, or an advantage that you found mentally where you could separate yourself from the people that you were competing with and the people you were really competing against?
Yeah. I think that was the game changer for me, was realizing that it was going to be more of a mental game more than it was anything else. And I didn't realize that until I probably got to my junior college, which were truly the 2 years of the most transformational kind of time for me, just as a player, but also as a boy to a man, right? Realizing, hey, I'm pretty good. High school, I did well enough to where now I'm at a junior college and all these guys are really good. And they're bigger, they're stronger, they throw harder. And I'm like, what is the thing that's going to separate me? Other than the work ethic and like leading by example rather than my voice, I was like, I have to tap into this mental game. And thankfully, the 2 coaches that I had at Chabot Junior College, Steve Friend being one of them, he was very big into being able to teach that and to walk us through what this looked like before it was cool, right? Like before people were doing it. And I realized how he would always say, in order for you to come in here and close the ball games, that you need to close down for us, right? As a unit, as a closer at the end, like you have to master the art of slowing the game when everything else speeds up. And that happens with routine. That happens with being consistent. It also happens with being able to remove the negativity when it does come to us and to understand that like it truly is a right here, right now, one pitch at a time moment. And that is the game of baseball. So when it came to me understanding that is going to be the thing that separates me, I went all in on it. And I became that crazy closer where the weird routine, I'd knock on my hat, I'd do my little circles, I'd have my breath work. And my teammates would always laugh. They'd be like, there he goes doing his thing. But they knew that's Charlie preparing literally one pitch at a time. And that's how I operate now.
That's a great segue. Couple of questions. So talk to me first about when your career in baseball started to slowly come to an end, because I think that period for all athletes is so critical. And I ask every athlete that I have on this show that same question because I struggled with it, that transitional period and going from this one thing that you always identified yourself with to having to discover not just what to do next, but actually who you are. So did you struggle with that? If so, how did you combat those mental challenges going forward after the career was over?
Yes, I did struggle with that. I think any one of us who had gone from sport to now what has struggles with it. And I think at the time, and now as I've had time to really reflect and also help others through it, I struggle with it because I didn't have anyone else to talk to about it. But when you ask me about my time going from junior college to Long Beach State to then with the Colorado Rockies, I felt like I was playing with house money. Like I never thought I would be there, which is an odd for an athlete to say, oh, you're a professional baseball player. You've had to always know that was going to happen. And I didn't. So for me, I took it more as gratitude than anything. And I was just thankful that I even had a chance to do it, that my family got to come see me in Oregon and be there as I came in for the end of the game. So have that moment is such a rarity that I never even dreamt of. So I was more thankful than anything. But then I was, again, in a different space of now what? Because I didn't plan for it. And I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. So my mental space was thankful, yet also isolating. Sport is done. And I was more confused with, I don't know what to do now. Because I did play with house money. I'm like, man, I'm doing it. I'm doing the thing. And all of a sudden it's taken away from you. And you're like, okay, now what do I do? The hardest part was after not being able to talk to anyone.
Yeah, 100%. I could not agree anymore. And that's why I wrote the book on the subject, Victory Outside the Arena, because I think there were so many athletes like myself. It's much more accepted and talked about now today. But
Yeah.
back then when I played, it was really a way for me to put into words, put into black and white, maybe something that could help people who are out there by themselves, because you really think at that moment that you're the only one going through it and that everybody else has the next step figured out, which is just simply not the case. So you're 100% right there. I also wanted to talk about whether or not you had any thoughts on staying in the game and actually coaching players. Since you didn't go that route, what actually led you to think about coaching in the corporate space?
Yeah, it's a good segue kind of when it comes to the timeline of the story. I, of course, thought, I think we all have an idea like, oh, I'm going to go coach, right? I'm going to do that. And because I had surgery and then rehab for 20 months, I isolated myself from not wanting to be in and around the game. But at that same time, going back to the story of baseball and nostalgia, right? It was around 2020 when the Giants started to go on their dynasty run of World Series championships, right? So I can't isolate myself away from the game, yet have my dad and my godfather, my mom, like watching these Giants game and not tap in. So that kind of kept me in the game a little bit. And then while my little brother was going through and playing at the same junior college that I came from, I was like, you know what? Let me rehab properly and go coach. So part of my transition out was still rehabbing while I was coaching. So that's where I got my fix, but I wasn't done yet. So then when I was done, I had talked to somebody who asked me, how have you closed the chapter? This is a lot of what I share now with other people. I'm like, what do you mean close the chapter? It was forced. I had shoulder surgery and I rehabbed for 2 years and I didn't come back. So you still have to find a way to close the chapter. So I did that at that junior college and had my dad come out and watch my last outing to see where I was at. And when you're throwing 83 miles an hour and you're 25 years old, it's time to hang them up. But to be able to do that, Bill, and then have my dad in the fans watching, hug him, cry, realize, hey, we're done. This was a hell of a ride. Now what? To me, that was a moment that now I share with other people to say, hey, not only should you celebrate your career and acknowledge it and close a chapter on your own terms, but if you can do it with someone you love, right, that's going to be a huge part of your journey. That even to this day, I've asked 5 people this in the past 2 weeks, former athletes, NFL vets, MLB veterans, how have you acknowledged and celebrated your career? To which they pause. And they say, I don't think I ever have. I'm like, yet you'll have a retirement party in 30, 40 years. But yet you can't acknowledge the fact that you played 11 years in minor league baseball and poured your heart and soul into something. What's the difference? And that's a huge part of this phase of being able to transition out and to find that purpose again. I don't know if I answered that question directly, so apologies if I didn't.
No, you answered it perfectly because you bring up something that is not talked about enough. And I would guess, I don't have the numbers, and you might have a guess as well. The vast majority of former athletes do not do what you just described. And I think that's where a lot of the pain and a lot of the uncertainty comes from because we don't, not that we have to mourn it, but we have to actually close that book, so to speak, and understand that it's over. And like you said, celebrate it because, us as athletes, we are
Yes.
conditioned to go to the next play or the next season and just look forward and move the chains and all of those good things. We're always looking forward. So it's really hard for us to stop and say, this is the end. And I think what you just advised all athletes to do for those that are listening is so perfect and so crucial. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, man, thank you for the question, Bill. And you just sparked me with not an idea, a conversation I had. You said mourn, right? And think about most players, athletes, that's exactly where their mind is when you're finishing a career. What do you mean celebrate my career? Like I played 2 years in the minor leagues and didn't make it. I had career-ending shoulder surgery. What am I celebrating? No, I mourned it for 5 years. I was disappointed. I was depressed. I was in a dark space. I had no one to talk to. What the hell am I celebrating? And
Right.
then that's when like and that is normal. And to which I say, good. Like that's okay for it to be normal. And when the time is right, that's my hope is that someone like yourself can celebrate it and acknowledge, man, I did some pretty cool things on the court, on the field, on the diamond. And that then I think got me into this notion of coaching, which I'm happy to go there if that's where we want to go next. What then took me into the space now, but it's all around helping people get seen and be seen, which is also coaching.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about the corporate quote unquote athletes that you're working with now, because there's
Yeah.
so many similarities between sports and business and I think a lot of times the corporate world tends to look to the athletic space as a model in terms of how to succeed because there's not a lot of necessarily a lot of black or not a lot of gray area in the sports world. Black and white. There's the standard is the standard and all of that stuff. And that's how results get accomplished on a big level. And so I think the corporate space is so similar to athletics, but they both can help each other if that makes sense. So talk to me a little bit about your early experiences with some of those professionals and some of the things that you've been able to bring to them from the world of baseball.
Yeah. They can help each other, right? They can be an intersection, which is the core of my work, if we allow them to. Coming from someone who did not allow it, someone who hid the background in my sport because I didn't want to be known as just the athlete. I think the term, again, another conversation. I don't want to be known or just seen as the dumb jock. Yet that's also sometimes a fear of us as we go into it. I don't want to be seen as just that guy because we know that guy, right? Or that gal. Not the case. If we can find a way to translate our experiences, our lessons, the transferable skills of grit, of resilience, of handling failure, and taking failure as feedback, that is such a unique part of an athlete's story that once we know how to tell it, we can then help and transform organizations and lives. And I didn't realize that until 7 years after, and I'm in software sales, and then I'm in leadership development, and I'm coaching and training. And I still literally have professional baseball player on my LinkedIn as a volunteer experience because I didn't consider it a job. And then what happens when you go in to lead an executive team or an enterprise sales team on creating a pitch and telling their story? They look you up. And then they try and, as an athlete would, they try and get you off a little, like they try to throw you off a little bit. Hey, who are you? Why should we be listening to you? And then all of a sudden someone's like, this guy played pro ball. And I'm like, yeah, no, like I didn't make it to the major leagues, but yeah, why should we be listening to you? And then all of a sudden I'd find myself naturally going into story. And then all of a sudden the guys would ask around mental preparation, vision, details, specifics, failure. And I would talk about it so freely, where I have all my other co-facilitators and coaches who have all these degrees that are like, Charlie, why are you not translating all of these lessons into your coaching practice and developing a business around like the intersection of sport, tech, and business and communication? Because you got something here. So when I tell someone like yourself, when you ask how is it working with a corporate athlete? This is exactly what I fought against for years. And now I'm like, no, once you find them and you can tap into their story, their identity as an athlete, and then translate it, they walk into a whole new field of performance. And then if they can then help their team understand those nuances, now we're playing a whole different game. And that's the core of what I'm doing now and what I love to do when I get a leader who does have that athletic pedigree.
How do you specifically coach them in terms of reinvention? Because we just touched on it. We've needed to reinvent ourselves as former athletes. This idea that we can reinvent ourselves because so many people, even those that were never athletes, they get on this one track or this one perception of themselves they have to stay on, and they can only be that. So, talk to me a little bit about reinvention as it pertains to the work that you're doing now.
Yes, I think it's essential. It's not the whole what got you here won't get you there thing. I know that's a book and that's like a way of thinking. It's to say, if I can identify those key moments of my story, of my skill set as an athlete, as a military vet, as an education, right, as a teacher, if I can take the core parts of that I know I am great at, or that allowed me to be successful or at a peak here, I'm not necessarily just reinventing. I'm taking what made me great and now I'm just applying it in this new world of whatever profession I'm in. The problem is that we don't actually give ourselves weight or flowers for what we did in that previous world, that previous identity. Because external or other, let's say, coaches or society will say, oh, don't trip on things in the past. Like you focus on the future. To which I say, yes. And if I know that the core of who I am and how I show up as a leader is rooted in my time growing up at Parkside Commons, my apartment complex, when it came to building community, listening, having an open door, if I know that, and if I could tap into that person and those lessons, just like you would in baseball or football, and I can use that and apply that now, that's something only you have the emotional connection to. If you can tap into that, and that's what I try to grab out of people, it's like, when did you learn that and why and who and how can we now create that here? People light up and they're like, okay, great. Let me tap into that 15-year-old you. And now what does that mean now? Like, how would you coach that 15-year-old self? Great. Now, awesome. How would you coach and lead your team now? That's where the magic happens.
No question. The past can be the key to our future if you just approach it the right way. I completely agree. In your
Correct.
coaching, you've emphasized that a no trends type of approach. So, talk to me a little bit about something that you've seen in your experience, maybe a conventional piece of wisdom that you think or that you've discovered is 100% completely overrated.
Oh, ask me that again, Bill. A trend?
You talk about
Yeah.
not having a trendy approach to this
Uh-huh.
whole
Yeah.
coaching world. So that you've seen
Yeah.
in that space that you think is a trend and maybe is a conventional piece of wisdom in this growth space that's completely overrated.
Yeah. You don't have to get up at 4 a.m. and work out 2 times a day to be a high performer. Now, I know that the 5 a.m. club's a thing. Insert podcasts, insert all of the different variables or people that have shared that. I get it. It's a thing. But if I understand myself and I know awareness is the root of high performance, and I know that I get creative and I can cook and I can feel amazing in my creative space at 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. at night when my babies are asleep and I have my environment, I have my setup and I have my routine, and I already did my 5K for the day, and I already got time with my wife, and I already did all the things I need to do professionally. Because I'm up at 11 p.m. does not mean that I am not a high performer. And I think that's where this awareness thing comes in. If I know that of myself, I'm not going to beat myself up because everyone else is telling me I got to get up at 4 a.m. and do 2 a days. That's not how it works. For some, it does. And to which I say, awesome. But that's probably the biggest There's a lot, Bill. It's long, but that's one that comes up that I tend to really not necessarily grit my teeth, but I just nod and say, okay, that's fine. That works for you, not for me.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to this idea that we all live in a fast-paced world and we just want somebody to give us the answers and tell us what the formula is. But that formula, like you mentioned, it might not work for everybody. It's not that simple because we've got to do the work, which takes a lot of time in figuring out what's best for ourselves. And like you mentioned, that's awareness. And that doesn't just happen in a quick spreadsheet or in a quick formula that somebody hands you. You got to take the time to experiment, make mistakes, of course, get uncomfortable in figuring out exactly what works for you. And I love this quote that you bring to the table, and you talk a lot about choosing presence over preference. Can you explain and describe to the listeners exactly how that plays in to the people that you're coaching now?
Yes, thank you for that, Bill. It's the ultimate gift. Us being present, right, as a leader, the most important thing that we can do is to be present with the person that's in front of us, that's speaking to us, that's connecting with us. And oftentimes that is also ourself, because sometimes we're not even present with ourselves. And it came from this realization of not just the background in baseball, where I got coached again. I mentioned my junior college coach, and then I spent time with the godfather of sports psychology, Ken Reviza, right, who would always talk about being where you need to be when you need to be there. And then when you have three beautiful little girls running around your house, right? You've got a business and you're an entrepreneur, and then you're traveling, and then you're speaking, and then you're coaching, you're doing community work, then you're having a relationship at home with your family, with your friends, with your wife, right? You can think in any given moment, even right now as I'm talking to you, I may prefer to be running, to be sending that follow up, to be doing something else. But if I'm committed and I'm choosing my presence, AKA my intention, my focus, my energy on you, that is the ultimate gift we can give anyone, including ourselves. Someone had asked me to take this like long-winded brand statement that I had worked on, and they said, "Can you get it into five words or less?" Her name's Krista Samaras, a wonderful friend of mine. I was like, "There's no way," and then it just rolled off the tongue. And I'm like, "Yeah, choose presence over preference. It is the ultimate gift that we can give anyone that we're leading, including ourselves."
Love it. My natural next question is, because I'm just asking this personally, how do you do that? Give me one way that somebody can choose to be present over preference, because my mind lately, especially, is just all over the place. And I'm sure yours is the same way. I've got a million things, and you just described them all the different areas of our life. Give me one tip where I can choose that presence.
I'll do two, one with somebody and then one with yourself. The one with yourself. Everyone has their own type of routine, how they close out a day. In this case, I love to take the time at the end of the day to have my closing routine in the same way I would do in baseball, but for myself. And I like to just think of three different variables. Did I hit my commitments that I told myself I wanted to do in the morning? Yes, no. C. What lesson did I learn today? We learn lessons every day. What is a lesson? And how am I going to apply what I just learned? L. CLR. Recognition. This is my favorite part. And this doesn't take more than 5 minutes. It takes 3 minutes probably total. Who do I want to recognize today? Is it myself? Is it a moment, something I saw? Or is it somebody else? And if I do recognize somebody else, I'm going to text them. I'm going to call them. I'm going to send a weird audio message because I want to let them know that I recognized them in that day, in that moment. This closing routine, whether you do it at the end of your workday or before you close your eyes at bed, the closing routine gives you a time to be present with your day, yourself, and your time. That's for self. The other person, how can I create this sense of space? Stop talking and learn the craft of what it means to truly actively listen, which we know and we say, I know how to do that. And then we constantly interject and listen to impress as opposed to listen to understand. So when it comes to being present, ask yourself, where's your phone? Is it in your pocket? Like, are you looking at it? Do you have multiple tabs open? Like, how are you actually showing the other person? One very trained skill is the ability to actively listen properly. properly. So find out what those variables are and what that means. We can go on all day around what the art of active listening is about.
Yeah, no, I love it. Not nearly enough people understand how to do that and exactly what it means. So I love that you brought that up as well. I did want to ask you too, in your work with corporate leaders, there are a lot of leaders out there who on the surface appear successful. They might even feel successful. They're checking a lot of those boxes, but they still feel, let's call it, unfulfilled. So in your experience, what really, because on the outside they have all these accolades and they're doing all the right things and maybe they're even at the top of the corporate ladder, but what is usually at the root of that stagnation or the feeling of not being fulfilled?
They've never asked themselves whose game they're playing, or they found themselves playing someone else's game until some sort of tragedy hits, or they get let go, or some pivotal moment happens, and then they have a midlife crisis, or that, why am I doing this? I never even wanted to do this. And here they are 15 years into their career. That stagnation or that moment, that peak, or they get the job. You'd be surprised. A lot of the individuals that I've talked to, they have that. I call them a that ain't it moment. They'll have them after being the most successful in their company. Thinking of a good buddy of mine, financial advisor, done all the things at President's Club, third year in a row in Hawaii. It's like watching his boss or watching the other guy get the trophy. He's with his family. And he was, man, I got nowhere to go but that. And here I'm a top rep. And I want no part of that. That ain't it. Okay, cool. Now we've identified that peak mountaintop that we are coveting is nothing that we actually want. Now, what I hope and what I'm fortunate with my previous communications firm is I get a chance to work with a lot of product managers over at Google. And a lot of what we talk about is this vision, right? These kids are brilliant. Harvard, MIT, you name it, software engineer, all the things. And they could very easily get into this trap of performance review, L3, L4, L5, they just keep going up the mountaintop that the external world tells them they need to in the product and technology world. It's where now all I'm saying is, hey, yes, and what part of this next job or this next role or this next function serves you? What are you excited about within this role? Just asking them that question. How is this in service of you? Not just the company, in you, is getting them to rethink. So that in 15 years, and they're the director, VP, or running a company, they can answer that question of, this is in service of me, just as much as it's in service of somebody else. And I think that's what people miss, is they never ask themselves, how is this in service of me?
Yeah, another way I like to ask it, and I do the same thing with the people that I work with, is what do you really want? And I know for so many years, I never was able to even, number one, ask myself that question because I thought I had known what I wanted since I was a kid. And then number two, I did not have the answer to that question. That's a really hard question to answer for a lot of people. It sounds simple, but it's really hard for people to answer because we think we know based on what we see other people having or what the quote unquote right thing to want is. And that's not necessarily the case, as you just mentioned. And you can waste a lot of time going down the wrong path instead of figuring out the one that's most well suited for
I think
you.
that's
So
it.
I'm so glad that you brought that up too.
That's it. It sounds simple in theory. And yes, you can ask the questions. There's so many different acts. Like people Google, right? Like the questions you can ask.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where it goes back into, do you give yourself that space and time to do it? And some of that is rooted in your identity. It goes back to what we talked a little bit about. And it's funny, even me jumping off to start my own firm after working with this other communications firm, I remember running to this day and I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. Was it athlete transition? Was it career transition? Was it storytelling? What is the thing I wanted to do? And I remember interviewing or coaching, I think it was their first job, intern, turning into a job at like Google or Verizon. It was one of the big tech companies here. And I was helping them on their presentation because that's a lot of the work that I would do. And I remember asking the woman, who was a 21-year-old girl, hey, this presentation is great. You're going to kill it. But there's nothing about you. Like it just says your degree and in your name and the university, but what about you? There's nothing about you. She was like, I'm sorry, what do you mean? I'm like, what about you? Do you like coffee? Is there something uniquely about you that you want to include as part of your introduction? And Bill, I swear, she stopped and she literally started to cry. So then I just paused for a second and I was like, all right, if there's anything you remember, it's not this structure that we just went through. It's not the numbers that you just produced. It's that you will forever answer that question when someone else asks you that. And you'll have a good answer of who you are. She was like, thank you. She left. And then I decided to bounce off and start my company or have the conversation with my CEO that I was going to go do something. And she was like, what are you going to go do? And I told myself, I told her, I was like, I think I'm going to help myself 10 years ago transition out of baseball to the real world, but I don't know yet. But I'm going to go help myself 10 years ago and then maybe also help myself out of tech software sales into this world of leadership development. That afternoon, I'm running and I'm listening to some sort of podcast. I don't know if it was Milet or Vaden. I don't know who it was, but it was like asking yourself the question of, if you're trying to find your purpose and who you need to serve in the world, answer this question. And it's a twofold question. What breaks your heart? And who did you need 10 years ago? I just got off the phone with my CEO and told her, I'm going to go help myself 10 years ago. And I just told my wife that I had this conversation with this intern, and it broke my heart that she told me she didn't know who she was outside of her degree in her sport, or her degree and what her job was. I said, all right, looks like I'm starting my own business.
An amazing start to an incredible career after athletics. Charlie, I have enjoyed being present with you. Thanks so much for all of that insight. I know the listeners are going to have so many takeaways from our conversation today, but tell those listeners how they can connect with you. How can they learn even more about the work that you're doing now?
Yes. So the website, clrconnection.com, that's where a lot of my stuff is. But you can also find me on social media. Instagram, it's Charles L. Ruiz. And I'm fairly active on LinkedIn as well. So if you are on LinkedIn, that's a way to see me go into my storytelling quite a bit. But then also just stay tuned, right? I'm excited to be launching the Sport of Speaking, which is going to be my version of how I'm helping leaders and teams and players and organizations master both the internal and the external game of communication. Stay tuned for the Sport of Speaking. That's soon to be coming, with also part of the summit coming up here at the end of the month.
Awesome. I cannot wait to see that, and I cannot wait to see what you do next. Thanks so much for being here, and please keep in touch, and here's to your continued success.
Appreciate you, Bill. Thank you, man.